Think about the most beautiful garden you've ever seen, the vibrant colors, the peaceful sounds, the feeling of being completely removed from the rush of the world. Now picture that same sense of tranquility, but in the heart of the ancient Roman Empire. I want you to imagine walking through a sprawling villa just outside of Rome, 2,000 years ago. You're surrounded not by wild, untamed nature, but by a landscape meticulously designed for beauty, for pleasure, and for profound cultural expression. These were Roman gardens, and they were so much more than just collections of plants. They were living rooms under the open sky, centers of philosophical thought, and powerful symbols of wealth and control. For the Romans, a garden was never just a garden. It was a statement written in soil, stone, and leaf, a direct reflection of their identity and their place in the world. We often envision Rome as a city of marble and legionaries, of grand politics and epic engineering, but this overlooks a fundamental part of their daily reality, a deep, abiding connection to the cultivated landscape. From the vast pleasure-filled retreats of emperors and senators to the modest, cherished courtyards tucked behind the busy shops of a city street, these green spaces were essential. They provided food, medicine, and shade, but their true purpose ran far deeper. They were sanctuaries for the soul, places for conversation and poetry, and physical manifestations of the Roman desire to impose order upon the chaos of nature. This was a civilization that brought water across mountains to feed its cities, so of course they would approach gardening not as a simple hobby, but as an art form and a science. They transformed the land into a stage for human life, blending the architectural with the organic in a way that feels surprisingly modern, even today. So what did these ancient oases actually look like? How do they function, and what can they tell us about the people who created them? In this journey, we're going to reconstruct these lost landscapes, piecing together evidence from buried villas, faded frescoes, and the words of poets and philosophers. We will walk through the perfumed air of luxurious peristyle gardens, explore the sacred groves dedicated to the gods, and even peek into the productive kitchen plots that fed families. We'll discover how these spaces were central to everything from religious ritual to social climbing, and uncover the ingenious technology that made such lushness possible in a sometimes harsh climate. This is a story of beauty, power, and a very human longing to create a corner of paradise on earth. To truly understand these spaces, we first need to grasp the Roman concept of the hortus. This single Latin word carries a meaning far richer and more complex than our modern English term garden. For us, a garden often implies a decorative area, a place of flowers and lawns, primarily designed for visual pleasure and relaxation. But for a Roman, the hortus was a complete, integrated environment, a seamless blend of practicality and beauty, where the needs of the body, the spirit, and society were all cultivated side by side. It was not merely a plot of land, it was a fundamental component of the domus, the Roman household, and it played a vital role in daily life. One corner might be dedicated to growing onions, leeks, and cabbages for the kitchen pot. Right next to it, you could find a carefully tended patch of rosemary for seasoning, poppies for pain relief, or mint for soothing an upset stomach. And just beyond that, a trellis heavy with roses will be cultivated specifically to provide petals for festive garlands or offerings at the family shrine. This combination of functions wasn't seen as messy or unrefined, it was the entire point. The Roman garden was a testament to self-sufficiency and a harmonious relationship with the land, where every plant had a purpose, whether that purpose was to feed, to heal, to honor the gods, or simply to delight the senses. This holistic approach becomes even clearer when we look at the social and symbolic dimensions of the hortus. While a humble city dweller's courtyard garden provided essential herbs and vegetables for the wealthy elite, the garden became a powerful stage for social display and intellectual pursuits. Imagine being invited to a lavish dinner party at a senator's villa. The meal would likely be served in the peristyle garden, an open courtyard surrounded by elegant columns. As you reclined on your couch, you wouldn't just be surrounded by pretty flowers, you'd be in a curated landscape designed to impress. The arrangement of rare plants imported from distant provinces demonstrated the owner's wealth and global connections. The splashing water of a central fountain showcased his control over a precious resource and his command of sophisticated engineering. Sculptures of gods, heroes, and philosophers placed among the greenery signaled his education and refined taste. In this context, the garden was a living extension of the owner's identity. It was a place for odium, that valued Roman ideal of cultivated leisure, where one could engage in philosophical debate, listen to poetry, or simply contemplate beauty, all within a space that was both aesthetically pleasing and deeply symbolic of Roman order and control over the natural world. So the fundamental difference lies in integration versus separation. We often compartmentalize these activities today. The vegetable patches in the backyard, the flower beds are in the front, and medicine comes from a pharmacy. The Roman hortus brought all these elements together into a single cohesive whole. It was a physical manifestation of a worldview that did not sharply distinguish between the useful and the beautiful, the sacred and the profane, the sustenance of the body and the refreshment of the mind. This integrated spirit is the key that unlocks our understanding of everything from the grandest imperial paradise to the smallest inner city courtyard. The Roman garden was never just one thing, it was everything at once: a pantry, an apothecary, a temple, a salon, and a living work of art. While the Roman hortus was a unique and integrated space, its design didn't spring from a vacuum. The Romans were masterful adapters, absorbing ideas from the cultures they encountered and then refashioning them on a grander, more systematic scale. The two most profound influences came from the civilizations they both admired and conquered: Greece and Egypt. As Roman legions secured victories and trade routes expanded, a flood of new ideas, exotic plants, and sophisticated technologies flowed back to the Italian peninsula, forever changing the Roman relationship with the land. From the Greeks, they inherited a powerful philosophical vision of what a garden could be. The Greek philosophers, particularly the Epicureans, championed the notion of a kypos, a garden as a sanctuary for quiet contemplation and intellectual discussion. Think of the famous school of Aristotle, known as the Lyceum, which was named for its location in a grove dedicated to Apollo. This wasn't a farm, it was a place for walking and talking, for thinking under the shade of trees. The Romans, with their immense respect for Greek learning, absorbed this ideal completely. They transformed the Greek kypos into their own concept of odium, that cultivated leisure for the elite, and the Roman garden became the preferred setting for this profound and peaceful intellectual activity. This philosophical import was matched by an infusion of aesthetic and technical knowledge from the East. When Roman forces under figures like Pompey established a foothold in the Hellenistic East, they were exposed to the incredibly ornate and symbolic royal gardens of Persian and Hellenistic kings. These were not just philosophical retreats, but bold statements of political power designed to showcase a ruler's dominion over nature itself. The Romans saw this and thought, "We can do that, but bigger and better." They began to incorporate the formal symmetry, the long colonnaded walkways, and the use of water features that characterized these Eastern pleasure parks, blending them with their own love of order and architectural grandeur. But it was the annexation of Egypt after the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra that provided a truly revolutionary toolkit. Egypt, a civilization utterly dependent on and masterful at controlling the Nile's water, offered practical solutions the Romans desperately needed for their own ambitious garden designs in a Mediterranean climate. The most crucial Egyptian contribution was in the realm of hydraulic engineering. From Egypt, the Romans adopted and then perfected devices like the shaduf, a simple but brilliant counterweighted lever used for lifting water from a river or canal into irrigation channels. This technology, which had sustained Egyptian agriculture for millennia, allowed Roman gardeners to efficiently water even elevated terraces and plots far from a direct water source. More than just a tool, the shaduf represented a principle that human ingenuity could reliably sustain lushness. The Romans took this principle and scaled it up to an almost unimaginable degree, eventually integrating the shaduf into the complex systems of aqueducts, lead pipes, and pressurized fountains that would become the hallmark of the truly luxurious Roman villa. Without this foundational knowledge of small-scale irrigation, the spectacular water displays of later imperial gardens might never have been conceived. Alongside these technical advances came a wave of botanical novelties. Conquest and trade with the East brought a cornucopia of new plants into Roman life. Previously unknown species like the peach, the apricot, the cherry, and various types of citrus and nuts arrived from Persia and Armenia. The famous Roman love for roses was supercharged by the introduction of more fragrant and repeat flowering varieties from the East. The Egyptian obsession with the lotus flower and other exotic blooms found its way into Roman decorative motifs and living plant collections. This influx transformed the Roman garden palette from a primarily utilitarian selection of native herbs and vegetables into a vibrant, cosmopolitan tapestry. Wealthy Romans competed to be the first to cultivate a rare foreign specimen, turning their gardens into living museums of the empire's reach. This wasn't merely horticultural fashion, it was a powerful, living demonstration of Rome's ability to absorb the entire known world, to bring the treasures of distant lands and place them quite literally in their own backyard. So the next time you picture a sophisticated Roman courtyard with its splashing fountain, its shaded walkways for philosophical conversation, and its beds of imported flowers, you are seeing a uniquely Roman creation, but one built upon a foundation laid by Greek thinkers, Persian kings, and Egyptian engineers. If the integrated hortus was the heart of the urban home, then the sprawling country estates of the Roman elite were its entire world, writ large upon the landscape. We now move from the peristyle courtyards of the city to the vast, breathtaking domains known as Villa Urbanae, the country villas that became the ultimate expression of aristocratic life and power. These were not merely large homes in the countryside, they were self-contained ecosystems, miniature kingdoms where the owner could play the part of a benevolent ruler, surrounded by every conceivable form of beauty and productivity. To understand their scale, we can turn to the letters of Pliny the Younger, who left us remarkably detailed descriptions of his own coastal villas. He doesn't just describe rooms, he paints a picture of an entire way of life, centered around a sequence of gardens and landscapes designed for different times of day, different moods, and different social functions. Picture a vast estate sprawling across hundreds of acres. Approaching the main residential villa, you would first pass through the productive heart of the property. On one side, orderly rows of vines stretch across sun-drenched hillsides, the source of the estate's renowned wine. On the other, orchards heavy with figs, apples, and the newly fashionable peaches and cherries provide fruit for the table and for trade. You might glimpse enclosed game parks where deer and boar were kept for hunting, and elaborate fish ponds or piscini stocked with mullet and lamprey for lavish dinners. This was the crucial duality of the Villa Urbana. It was first and foremost a working, profitable agricultural enterprise. The wealth that funded the owner's life of luxury in Rome was generated right here from the land itself. This economic self-sufficiency was a cornerstone of Roman aristocratic identity, a tangible link to their idealized agrarian past, and a very public demonstration that their fortune was built on the solid foundation of land ownership. Yet the true marvel was how this functionality was woven seamlessly into a landscape of unparalleled luxury and artistry. Beyond the vineyards and orchards lay the villa's pleasure gardens, areas designed with a level of sophistication that dwarfed anything in the city. Pliny the Younger describes one of his villas as having a garden designed to look like a natural, wild landscape, complete with a winding path that offered a constantly changing view. He writes of another villa featuring a hippodromus, a long, curved garden shaped like a Roman circus, lined with plane trees, box hedges, and sculptures, designed for leisurely strolls and contemplative conversation. These were not just pretty parks, they were complex, multi-sensory environments. The air would be thick with the scent of rosemary and violets planted along the walkways. The quiet would be broken only by the sound of water, not just a single fountain, but complex networks of channels, cascades, and pools that cooled the air and provided a constant, soothing soundtrack. The gardens were populated with a veritable museum of sculpture, with bronze and marble figures depicting gods, mythical beasts, and famous philosophers placed at strategic points to surprise and delight the visitor turning a corner. This grand design served a profound social purpose. A villa like Pliny's was a stage for hospitality and political networking. When important guests arrived, they weren't just shown the house, they were taken on a grand tour of the entire estate. The owner would lead them through the productive fields to showcase his wealth and good management, and then into the exquisite pleasure gardens to display his refined taste and cultural sophistication. Every curated view, every rare imported tree, every cleverly engineered water feature was a calculated part of this performance. It communicated a powerful message. I am not merely rich, I am a man of learning, a patron of the arts, and a master of my environment. The Villa Urbana was therefore the ultimate status symbol. It allowed the Roman elite to live out a pastoral fantasy of rustic simplicity while enjoying every comfort and luxury the empire could provide, a perfect synthesis of profit and pleasure, power and poetry, all contained within the boundaries of their own private paradise. But while the sprawling country villa represented the ultimate dream, the everyday reality of Roman life for the well-to-do citizen unfolded within the walls of the city townhouse, the domus. And at the very center of this urban dwelling, both physically and spiritually, lay its most cherished space, the peristyle garden. After passing through the public, business-oriented entrance hall, the atrium, a visitor would be led into this private, inward-facing sanctuary. Imagine a rectangular courtyard open to the sky, completely surrounded by a graceful colonnade of slender columns supporting a shaded walkway. This was the peristyle. Underfoot, the floor might be a vibrant mosaic, while the walls surrounding the colonnade were often adorned with breathtaking frescoes that extended the garden illusion even further, depicting lush landscapes, exotic birds, and sacred groves. But the true masterpiece was the living, breathing garden at its center. This was not the utilitarian hortus of old, but a meticulously designed ornamental landscape. The planting beds, arranged in precise geometric patterns, were a symphony of color, texture, and fragrance. You would find carefully trimmed boxwood hedges defining the borders, with roses, violets, and lilies adding splashes of color. The air would be heavy with the scent of herbs like rosemary and lavender, planted not just for cooking, but for their perfume. Every element was chosen for its aesthetic and symbolic value. Towering above it all might be a plane tree or a tall, slender cypress, providing dappled shade and a vertical accent that drew the eye upward. The centerpiece of this green tableau was almost always a fountain or a small marble basin, its gentle splashing sound a constant cooling presence that masked the noise of the city beyond the walls. This water feature was more than decorative. It was the lifeblood of the garden, sustaining the plants and contributing to a microclimate of refreshing coolness. The peristyle's design made it the literal and figurative heart of the home. All the main rooms of the house, the dining room, the master study, the family bedrooms opened directly onto this colonnaded walkway, all turning their backs on the noisy street to face this tranquil inner world. It functioned as a private oasis, an outdoor living room where the rhythms of family life played out. Here in the dappled sunlight, the matron of the house might oversee her children's play or discuss the day's meals with the cook. The master of the house would use the shaded portico for receiving his closest friends, conducting business in a more relaxed setting, or simply reclining with a scroll of poetry. In the evening, the family and their most intimate guests would dine in the triclinium, the couches arranged so they could look out through the wide doorway, enjoying the sight and sound of the garden as they ate. The garden was a permanent, living painting, a part of the home's very architecture. This inward-focused design created a profound psychological effect. Stepping from the bustling, chaotic, and often malodorous public streets of an ancient Roman city into the serene, perfumed, and visually ordered space of the peristyle was like entering another world. It was a deliberate withdrawal, a creation of a private paradise sealed off from the demands of public life. The garden became a sanctuary for the spirit, a place for what the Romans called odium, that cultivated leisure essential for a balanced life. It was where one could reconnect with nature, even in the heart of a metropolis, and engage in the quiet pursuits of the mind. The statues placed thoughtfully among the foliage reinforced this purpose. A marble figure of Mercury might symbolize commerce and communication, while a statue of Venus spoke of love and beauty. A bust of a famous philosopher like Socrates or Epicurus served as a constant reminder of the value of wisdom and contemplation. In this way, the peristyle garden was far more than a collection of pretty plants. It was a multi-sensory environment that nourished the family, fostered social bonds, and provided a daily refuge of beauty and peace, a perfect miniature of the Roman ideal, right in the center of the home. Walking through a Roman garden would have been an experience for all the senses, but perhaps none was more delighted than the sense of smell. The air was a complex tapestry of fragrances, woven from a carefully selected palette of flowers and herbs. Leading this aromatic symphony was the rose, the undisputed queen of the Roman garden. The Romans weren't just fond of roses, they were obsessed. They cultivated countless varieties, favoring those with the most potent perfume, like the famous Rosa Gallica, and developed sophisticated techniques to force blooms out of season so their dinner parties could be lavishly decorated with rose garlands and their fountains could run with rose-scented water. But roses were far from the only performers. Violets, with their sweet, modest scent, were strewn across banquet couches and floors, and lilies, prized for their pure white color and heavy, almost intoxicating fragrance, were cultivated in dedicated beds. These flowers weren't just passive decorations, they were active ingredients in the Roman pursuit of pleasure, their scents mingling to create an atmosphere of luxury and refined sensory enjoyment. Alongside these showy blooms, a more practical yet equally fragrant chorus of herbs filled the garden borders and pathways. Rosemary, with its sharp, cleansing aroma, was ubiquitous, valued not only for seasoning food but also for its use in religious ceremonies and as a symbol of remembrance. Thyme crept between stepping stones, releasing its peppery scent when brushed against by a passing sandal. Lavender grew in silvery green clumps, its calming fragrance harvested for perfumes, soaps, and to scent linens and bathwater. Marjoram, sage, and mint were equally common, each serving a triple purpose. They were culinary staples, medicinal remedies, and sources of delightful fragrance. This herbal undercurrent provided a constant, grounding bass note to the floral perfumes, a reminder of the garden's deep-rooted connection to health and home. The Romans understood the link between scent and well-being long before the term aromatherapy was coined, and their gardens were designed as much for healing the spirit as for pleasing the eye. Of course, a Roman garden was also a place of sustenance, and no space was complete without its fruit trees, which blended beauty with delicious practicality. The fig tree was a particular favorite, a classic symbol of abundance and peace, often planted to provide deep, welcoming shade for outdoor bench or dining area. Apples and pears were carefully cultivated, with different varieties selected for taste and storage, but the Roman palate, ever eager for novelty, constantly sought out new tastes from the expanding empire. As trade routes solidified and conquests brought new territories under Roman control, a wave of exotic species began to appear in Italian soil. The peach, known as the Persian apple, was a prized import from the east. The apricot or Armenian plum followed a similar path to popularity. The sweet cherry, reportedly brought back to Rome by the general Lucullus after his campaigns in the Black Sea region, became a sensational luxury. The challenge then became not just importing a single specimen, but successfully acclimatizing these foreign trees, learning their needs and integrating them into the local ecosystem. This passion for botanical collection became a powerful marker of status and sophistication among the Roman elite. To cultivate a plant that no one else had, to be the first to harvest a fruit from a tree native to a land barely on the map, was a triumph. It was a living, growing trophy of Rome's global reach. Wealthy patrons would fund expensive expeditions specifically to gather new plants, and elaborate manuals were written on the best methods for transporting delicate seeds and saplings across the Mediterranean. Specialized garden spaces, almost like proto-greenhouses called specularia, were developed using thin sheets of mica to create protected, warm environments for the most delicate imports. This wasn't mere gardening, it was a form of cultural and scientific ambition. The Roman garden became a living library of the known world, a collection of earthly wonders that demonstrated a mastery over nature not through force alone, but through knowledge, patience, and a deep, abiding curiosity for the botanical riches the world had to offer. While the vibrant colors and intoxicating scents defined much of the garden's character, there was one element that truly brought the entire scene to life, transforming it from a beautiful picture into a living, breathing experience: the essential, mesmerizing presence of water. In the warm, dry climate of the Mediterranean, water was more than a mere resource. It was the soul of the garden, a symbol of life, luxury, and technological mastery. The gentle, cooling sound of its movement was not an optional extra, but an absolutely essential ingredient for creating the tranquil, refreshing atmosphere the Romans so deeply cherished. To achieve this, they deployed engineering solutions of breathtaking ambition, bringing water from distant mountains directly into their urban villas and country estates, where it was orchestrated into a symphony of fountains, pools, and canals. This feat of hydraulic engineering began far beyond the garden walls, with the monumental aqueducts that are still icons of Roman ingenuity today. These graceful art structures were the grand arteries of the empire, carrying millions of gallons of fresh water over staggering distances. But the true magic for the gardener happened at the end point of this system. Once the main aqueduct channel entered a city, its water was distributed through a complex network of lead pipes known as fistulae. These pipes, controlled by stopcocks and regulating basins, allowed for precise control over the flow, directing water under pressure to individual homes and villas. It was this pressurized system that made the Roman fountain possible. Unlike a simple gravity-fed spring, a pressurized system could force water upwards, creating the elegant jets and sprays that danced in the sunlight of a peristyle courtyard. The technological leap from simply channeling water for drinking to manipulating it for pure aesthetic pleasure represents a fundamental shift in how the Romans viewed their relationship with the natural world. They weren't just using water, they were composing with it. Within the garden itself, this engineered water was presented in a variety of beautiful and symbolic forms. The most common feature was the fons or fountain, often a central marble or bronze sculpture from which water gracefully spouted. This could be a simple mask of a river god, a playful dolphin, or an elegant statue of a nymph. The water would collect in a shallow basin below, its continuous splashing providing that constant, soothing soundtrack. For those with even more space and wealth, the piscina or ornamental pool became a centerpiece. These were not the small basins of the peristyle but larger, rectangular pools, sometimes lined with vibrant blue mosaic tiles to mimic a natural pond. They might even be stocked with ornamental fish, adding another layer of life and movement to the scene. But perhaps the most sophisticated water feature was the Euripus. This was a long, narrow canal, inspired by the strait between Euboea and Boeotia in Greece. In a Roman garden, a Euripus would snake through a planted area, creating a serene, reflective ribbon of water. Crossing these canals were small, decorative bridges, inviting visitors to pause and admire the view. In the most lavish imperial gardens, like those of Emperor Hadrian's villa at Tivoli, the Euripus evolved into grand, canal-lined pathways that guided the visitor through an entire aquatic landscape. The purpose of all this moving water was profoundly multi-sensory. Visually, the sparkle of sunlight on a spray of water, the dark, cool depth of a pool, and the shimmering reflection of the surrounding greenery doubled the garden's beauty. But the auditory effect was just as important. The sound of trickling, splashing, and bubbling water was recognized as a powerful tool for masking the noise of the outside world, whether the clamor of a city street or the quiet buzz of insects on a hot afternoon. This created a perceived coolness, a psychological refuge that made the garden feel like a separate, more peaceful realm. This wasn't just a happy accident, it was a core principle of Roman landscape design. The writer and architect Vitruvius explicitly advised that gardens and outdoor dining areas should be situated where the sound of fountains could be enjoyed, understanding that this natural white noise enhanced conversation and relaxation. Water was the ultimate unifier in the Roman garden, binding together the visual beauty of the plants and sculpture with an immersive soundscape that cooled the air, calmed the mind, and completed the sensation of having stepped into a perfected, human-made paradise. Just as the plants' scents and sounds created an immersive atmosphere, the physical objects placed within the garden gave it its soul and intellectual depth. A Roman garden was not considered complete until it was populated with a curated collection of ornamentation, statues, mosaics, and marble furnishings that transformed the landscape into an open-air gallery and a stage for storytelling. These were not random decorations. Every piece was chosen with deliberate intent to convey specific messages about the owner's wealth, education, and philosophical leanings. As you strolled along the shaded colonnade or down a gravel path, your journey will be punctuated by encounters with figures from myth and history, your eyes drawn downward to intricate patterns underfoot, and your rest invited by exquisitely carved benches. This layer of artistry elevated the garden from a mere pleasure ground to a deeply personal and cultural statement, a physical extension of the owner's mind. The most prominent and evocative of these ornaments were the statues, which brought the garden to life with silent, marble and bronze companions. You would find them everywhere, standing sentinel at the end of a path, nestled in a leafy niche, or reflected in the still water of a pool. The divine world was a constant presence. A statue of Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, might preside over a secluded rose garden, her form a symbol of the idealized beauty the Romans sought to cultivate in their own lives. A figure of Bacchus, the god of wine and ecstatic release, often appeared near dining areas, a fitting patron for the convivial gatherings that took place there. But the pantheon wasn't the only source of characters. Mythical creatures like satyrs and nymphs populated the groves, suggesting a wild, untamed spirit lurking just within the bounds of the ordered garden. These figures bridged the gap between the civilized Roman world and the primal forces of nature, creating a sense of enchantment and possibility. A statue of a sleeping Ariadne or a grieving Niobe could introduce a note of poignant drama, reminding visitors of the great stories of love and loss from which the Romans drew their cultural identity. Beyond the gods and myths, the statuary also reflected more personal and intellectual aspirations. It was incredibly common to find portrait busts of famous Greek philosophers, a stern-faced Socrates, a thoughtful Plato, or a smiling Epicurus. Placing these thinkers among the flowers and fountains was a clear declaration. It signaled that this was a place for odium, for the cultivated leisure of the mind, where one was expected to engage in thoughtful conversation and philosophical reflection. The garden was a school without walls, and these marble teachers were the permanent faculty. Similarly, the inclusion of lifelike statues of animals, a crouching leopard ready to pounce, a faithful hound, or a graceful deer served a dual purpose. They showcased the sculptor's incredible skill in capturing natural forms, and they reinforced the theme of the villa as a self-contained, rustic paradise where even wild nature was present, albeit in a tamed, artistic form. The choice of statues, therefore, allowed a wealthy Roman to silently communicate a great deal. I am pious, I am learned, I appreciate great art, and I understand the deeper currents of our culture. While the statues commanded attention at eye level, a different kind of artistry lay underfoot, transforming the very ground you walked on into a masterpiece. Mosaic pathways were a hallmark of luxury, turning a simple walk through the garden into a journey across a vibrant tapestry of stone and glass. These were not the simple pebble floors of earlier times, but complex compositions made from thousands of tiny, hand-cut pieces of stone and glass, called tesserae. The designs could be geometric, creating intricate, repeating patterns of swirls and cubes that guided your steps with rhythm and order, but often they ventured into the fantastical. You might walk across a floor depicting a litter of cupids playing with a cart pulled by butterflies, a scene of breathtaking whimsy and technical skill. Another might show a theatrical mask, a symbol of the performance and role-playing inherent in Roman social life, or a still life of fruit and fish so realistic it seemed you could reach down and pick them up. These mosaics were durable, colorful, and proof that no detail was too small to be overlooked in the pursuit of beauty. Complementing these visual feasts were the functional artworks, the marble benches and tables strategically placed for rest and contemplation. Carved from expensive, often imported marble, these benches were far from utilitarian. Their legs might be shaped like griffins or lions, their sides adorned with carved garlands of fruit and flowers that echoed the living garden around them. Placed at a scenic viewpoint overlooking a pool, facing a particularly beautiful statue, or situated in a cool, breezy spot, these benches invited you to pause, to sit, and to simply be within the curated environment. This was where you could fully absorb the symphony of the garden, the dappled light filtering through the leaves, the scent of rosemary carried on the breeze, the soft murmur of the fountain, and the silent stories told by the surrounding statues. The bench was the physical point of engagement, the place where the passive experience of viewing the garden became an active, immersive participation in its tranquil mood. Together, the statues that spoke of myth and mind, the mosaics that enriched the earth, and the marble that offered rest, formed a complete aesthetic ecosystem. They ensured that every glance, every step, and every moment of repose was filled with meaning, beauty, and a profound connection to the wider world of Roman culture and thought. Within this orchestrated landscape of water, scent, and sculpture, one area was often dedicated to the most disciplined and creative expression of the Roman gardener's art, the xystus. This was the formal ornamental garden, a space where nature was not just curated but meticulously choreographed into precise geometric patterns. Walking into a xystus felt like entering a living architectural drawing, a testament to the Roman desire for order, symmetry, and control. The foundation of this design was almost always the low, neatly clipped boxwood hedge. These hedges, known as buxus, were used to create intricate parterres, carving the earth into a series of beds shaped as squares, circles, and interlocking diamonds. Within these green-lined compartments, the soil would be a riot of color, planted with vibrant flowers like scarlet poppies, deep blue violets, and pure white lilies, creating a stunning contrast against the dark green borders. This wasn't a random patch of beauty, it was a calculated display, a carpet of living color laid out according to a strict and rational plan, meant to be admired from the elevated walkways of the surrounding peristyle. But the Romans took this control over plant life a revolutionary step further, becoming the first civilization in the Western world to master the art of topiary. The Latin word topiarius didn't just refer to the art form itself, but to the highly skilled gardener who practiced it, a specialist who wielded his shears with the precision of a sculptor. This was where the garden truly transcended nature and entered the realm of fantasy. Using small-leaved, dense-growing plants like boxwood and myrtle, the topiarius would spend years training and clipping shrubs into an astonishing array of shapes. Some forms were elegantly simple, crisp cones, towering obelisks, and clean geometric spheres that provided architectural structure and punctuation points throughout the garden. These shapes reinforced the Roman love for clear, defined forms, bringing the solidity of architecture into the softness of the living landscape. The true marvel, however, lay in the more complex and playful creations. A topiarius of great skill could transform a simple bush into a fleet of sailing ships, a hunting scene with hounds chasing a deer, or even a menagerie of green animals. Imagine strolling through a garden and encountering a perfectly shaped bear, a peacock with a full leafy tail, or a rabbit, all carved from living foliage. The most ambitious topiary even tackled scenes from mythology, creating a silent, evergreen tableau of heroes and gods. This practice was far more than just a horticultural novelty. It was a powerful, living metaphor. Topiary demonstrated a complete and utter mastery over the wild, untamed essence of nature. It showed that the Roman gardener could impose not just order, but narrative and art onto the very growth of a plant. A wild shrub left to its own devices was chaos. That same shrub, clipped into the form of a triumphant gladiator, was civilization itself. It was a profound statement that in the Roman world, even nature could be educated, refined, and made to tell a story. Yet for all the artistry of topiary and the grandeur of marble fountains, the most essential and deeply rooted part of any Roman property was the kitchen garden, known as the hortus salubarius, the most healthful garden. This wasn't a separate, hidden-away plot that the wealthy tried to disguise. Even on the most lavish country estates, right alongside the ornamental xystus and the rose-covered walkways, you would find a meticulously organized and utterly practical space dedicated to feeding the household and keeping it in good health. This commitment to self-sufficiency was a point of pride, a tangible link to the old Roman ideal of the citizen farmer, and it showcased a clear-eyed understanding that beauty was wonderful, but sustenance was fundamental. The hortus salubarius was the living embodiment of this principle, a vibrant and productive engine room that powered the entire villa. What would you have found growing here? The core of this garden was built on a familiar triad of vegetables that formed the bedrock of the Roman diet: leeks, onions, and cabbages. These were not just occasional ingredients, they were staples, appearing in pots and on platters nearly every day. The Romans cultivated several varieties of cabbage, praising it not only for its taste but also for its purported medicinal qualities, using it to treat everything from digestive troubles to wounds. Onions and their close relative garlic were equally indispensable, providing a powerful base flavor for stews and sauces, and were also valued as a source of strength for laborers and soldiers. Leeks, with their milder taste, were often boiled or dressed with oil and vinegar as a simple side dish, but the vegetable patch extended far beyond these basics. Artichokes and cardoons were prized for their unique, savory flavor. Asparagus was a seasonal delicacy, hunted for in the wild but also carefully cultivated in raised beds. Broad beans, lentils, and peas provided essential protein, while lettuces and radishes added fresh crunch to the table. This was a full-spectrum food production system designed to supply the kitchen with a continuous harvest throughout the growing season. Interwoven with these rows of vegetables was another, even more vital layer of planting, the herb garden. Here, the line between the culinary and the medicinal completely vanished. as the same plants that seasoned the food also treated ailments. A Roman cook would step outside to gather handfuls of fresh coriander, dill, and rue to flavor a fish sauce or a lamb roast. At the same time, the household matron, who was often responsible for the family's health care, would harvest from the very same plants. She might dry fennel seeds to aid digestion, brew a tea from thyme to soothe a cough, or create a poultice from sage leaves for a wound. This intimate knowledge of the healing properties of plants was considered essential domestic wisdom. The poppy, grown for its seeds to flavor bread, also provided the raw material for the pain-relieving opium latex. Mint was used to freshen breath and settle an upset stomach. The Hortus salubarium was in effect the family's pharmacy, a living first aid kit cultivated just steps from the kitchen door. This practical garden was a masterclass in efficient design and intensive cultivation. The beds were typically laid out in raised rectangles, framed with boards or low walls of turf to contain the soil and define the walking paths. This made planting, weeding, and harvesting far more manageable. The Romans were also expert composters, carefully recycling kitchen scraps, animal manure, and fallen leaves to create rich, fertile humus that would be forked back into the beds each season. They practiced crop rotation, intuitively understanding that alternating different types of plants would help maintain the soil's vitality. To extend the growing season, they employed innovative techniques like using terracotta caps, called tectoria, to protect delicate seedlings from late frosts, and they built cold frames using sheets of translucent selenite or mica to create a greenhouse effect for the most valuable herbs and out-of-season delicacies. Every inch of space was utilized. Fruit trees like figs and pears might provide a canopy of shade for lettuce that preferred cooler conditions, while bean vines would be trained up trellises, saving ground space and fixing nitrogen in the soil for the next crop. In the bustling heart of the city, this tradition of the kitchen garden adapted brilliantly to the constraints of urban life. For the vast majority of Romans living in cramped multi-story apartment blocks, the grand peristyle was an impossible dream. But the instinct to grow one's own food and medicine was undiminished. Those who were fortunate enough to live in a ground-floor apartment with a small courtyard, or even just a sunny windowsill, would cultivate their essentials in pots and planters. Terracotta amphorae, with their bottoms broken out, were sunk into the ground to create deep root runs for a cherished rosemary bush or a small bay laurel tree. Window boxes overflowed with chives, parsley, and mint, their fragrant leaves always within easy reach. For the urban poor, a single pot of rue or sage on a ledge was a vital piece of household security. This ubiquitous presence of the Hortus salubarium, from the sprawling country estate to the humble city window box, reveals a profound and universal truth about Roman culture. It was a society that, despite its marble monuments and global ambitions, never fully lost its connection to the soil, understanding that true wealth and health began with the simple, steadfast act of planting a seed and nurturing it to harvest. Yet beyond the walls of the private home and the cultivated fields of the country estate, there existed another, far more ancient and mystical type of Roman garden, one that belonged not to any individual, but to the gods themselves. These were the sacred groves, known in Latin as the lucus. To step from the geometrically precise xystus of a wealthy patron's villa into a lucus was to cross a profound threshold, moving from a world of human order into a realm of divine presence. Unlike the manicured peristyle with its clipped boxwood and engineered fountains, the sacred grove was deliberately designed to feel ancient, wild, and untouched by human hands. It was a place where the Romans consciously set aside their drive to control nature, instead humbly acknowledging a power greater than their own. The very air within a lucus was considered different, charged with sanctity, silence, and a palpable sense of awe. These were not gardens built for leisure or social display. They were portals to the primordial, the dwelling places of deities, and the backdrop for the most solemn rituals of the Roman state. The physical character of a lucus was defined by its trees. These were not the decorative saplings planted in a city courtyard, but ancient towering giants, massive oaks sacred to Jupiter, groves of beech trees revered for their oracular whispers, or dark, dense cypresses associated with the underworld. The canopy they formed was so thick that it was said daylight barely penetrated to the forest floor, creating a perpetual, cool twilight. This was a carefully curated wilderness. The undergrowth was often left to grow freely, a tangle of native shrubs and flowering plants that further enhanced the feeling of a place outside of time. The only man-made structures permitted within this hallowed space were those essential for worship: a simple stone altar, darkened by the smoke of countless sacrifices, or a small open-air temple or eaves, built to house the cult statue of the god. The paths were not paved with intricate mosaics, but were perhaps little more than worn tracts of earth, trod by priests and pilgrims. The soundscape was utterly different, too. Gone was the cheerful splash of a decorative fountain. In its place was the deep silence broken only by the rustle of leaves in the wind, the call of a bird, or the low murmur of prayer. This deliberate wildness was not a sign of neglect, but a fundamental part of the grove's spiritual purpose. It represented the raw, untamed power of the divine, a force that existed long before Roman cities and would endure long after. These sacred groves served as the vital backdrop for a wide array of religious practices that were central to Roman public and private life. They were the preferred sites for consulting the gods before major state undertakings. A general on the eve of a military campaign might come to a grove of Mars to offer sacrifices and seek the god's favor, reading the will of the deity in the flight of birds observed through the branches or in the appearance of a sacrificed animal's entrails. Individuals, too, would journey to these holy sites to make personal vows. A merchant hoping for a safe sea voyage might pledge a small offering to Neptune at a coastal grove, while a woman praying for a child might leave a terracotta figurine at the altar of Diana Nemorensis in her sacred wood near Lake Nemi. The grove was a place of direct communication, where the boundary between the mortal and divine worlds was believed to be at its thinnest. The very trees were seen as vessels of divine energy. Some were thought to be inhabited by specific nymphs or spirits, and it was considered a grave sacrilege, punishable by death, to break a branch or fell a tree within a lucus. This reverence highlights a deep-seated Roman belief in numen, the spiritual force or presiding divinity of a place. The grove was not just a pretty location for a temple. The grove itself was the primary temple, a natural cathedral whose pillars were ancient trees and whose roof was the sky. The philosophical and emotional contrast between the sacred grove and the private garden could not be more striking. The Roman peristyle was an exercise in bringing the outside in, of domesticating nature for human comfort and pleasure. It was a space for otium, for the civilized leisure of the mind. The lucus, conversely, was about humans stepping out of their domestic sphere and into the domain of the gods. It was a space for religio, for the binding obligations and awe-inspiring encounters of faith. One was an expression of human control and aesthetic taste. The other was an acknowledgement of powers that humans could never fully control. This duality reveals a fascinating tension within the Roman worldview. They were a people who famously built straight roads and aqueducts across mountains, embodying a drive to impose rational order on the world. Yet simultaneously, they preserved and venerated these pockets of primal wilderness, recognizing that some mysteries were too vast for their engineering and that some forces demanded reverence, not redesign. The existence of the sacred grove served as a permanent living reminder that for all their worldly power and architectural genius, the Romans still felt the need to connect with something older, wilder, and more powerful than themselves. In preserving the lucus, they preserved a vital channel to the sacred, ensuring that their meticulously ordered civilization never completely lost its soul to stone and mortar. While the sacred groves connected the Roman people to the ancient divine and the private villas showcased elite power, there was a third type of green space that pulsed with the vibrant, democratic energy of urban life itself: the public park and portico garden. For the average Roman citizen, the dream of a private peristyle was utterly out of reach, but the city itself offered magnificent communal oases, transforming the concept of leisure from a private privilege into a public right. Imagine the relentless sensory overload of ancient Rome, the crush of crowds on narrow streets, the cacophony of cartwheels on stone, the thick air of 1 million people living in close quarters. In this environment, the great public porticos were not just nice amenities. They were essential escapes, vast column sanctuaries where anyone from a wealthy merchant to a humble cobbler could find a moment of peace, beauty, and social connection without needing an invitation. The most famous and influential of these was the Portico of Pompeii, a monumental complex dedicated to the public by the General Pompey the Great around 55 B. See, this wasn't a simple garden. It was one of the world's first multi-purpose cultural and recreational centers. At its heart was a vast rectangular park, a porticus in the truest sense, featuring long shaded walkways created by double rows of columns on all sides. These covered promenades provided shelter from both the scorching summer sun and the occasional rain, allowing citizens to stroll in comfort no matter the weather. But this was merely the frame for the masterpiece within. The open central area was a lush, landscaped garden filled with shady trees, fragrant flowering shrubs, and cool lawns. It was a deliberate recreation of the luxurious gymnasium gardens of the Greek East, but with a revolutionary Roman twist. It was for everyone. Here, the common people could experience the same refined pleasures of walking among art and nature that were once reserved for philosophers and kings. Beyond the greenery, the portico of Pompeii was a veritable museum without walls. The colonnades were lined with a breathtaking collection of sculptures and paintings, turning a simple walk into an educational and aesthetic journey. You could gaze upon famous Greek masterpieces that Pompey had brought back as spoils from his campaigns, absorbing classical culture simply by being present. This fusion of art, architecture, and nature was a powerful political statement. By gifting this space to the people, Pompey wasn't just providing a park, he was framing himself as a generous patron of the populace, a man who used his immense wealth and power to enrich the lives of every citizen. He was buying political capital, certainly, but he was also permanently elevating the urban standard of living, setting a precedent that future emperors would feel compelled to follow. Following this model, the concept of the public portico garden became a cornerstone of imperial civic policy. Later emperors, from Augustus to Nero and beyond, competed to outdo each other in providing magnificent public spaces for the Roman mob, understanding that a well-entertained and comfortable populace was a stable one. The portico of Livia, built by Augustus and named for his wife, offered another shaded retreat on the Oppian Hill. The gardens of Agrippina, bequeathed to the people by the mother of the infamous Emperor Caligula, provided yet another sprawling green lung along the banks of the Tiber. These spaces served as the city's true living rooms. They were teeming social hubs where the rigid hierarchies of Roman society softened, if only for a moment. Here a senator might rub shoulders with a shopkeeper, a lawyer could debate a point of law with a visiting foreigner, and families could bring their children to play on the grass. The activities within these gardens were as varied as the people who visited them. Philosophers and their students would gather in small groups under the shade of a plane tree, continuing the tradition of the Greek quipos, but on a grand, public scale. Poets might recite their latest works to anyone who would stop and listen. Business deals were struck on marble benches, friends met to catch up on the latest gossip, and young couples stole moments of privacy along the secluded pathways. For the vast majority of Romans living in cramped, dark, and often unsafe apartment blocks, these public parks were not a luxury, they were a vital extension of their own tiny living spaces. They provided the clean air, the sense of community, and the psychological breathing room that their private dwellings could not. The public portico garden was a brilliant social innovation, a democratic reimagining of the elite villa lifestyle that ensured the grandeur of Rome was not locked behind private walls, but was woven into the very fabric of the city, accessible to all. If the public porticos were a gift to the people, then the imperial gardens were a declaration of a different kind altogether, a stunning assertion that the emperor stood above the people, above the Senate, and even above the very geography of Rome itself. The most infamous and breathtaking example of this imperial extravagance was the Domus Aurea, the golden house of Nero, following the Great Fire of 64 AD. That cleared vast tracts of the city. Nero did not simply rebuild. He seized the opportunity to construct a personal paradise so vast and so audacious that it fundamentally redefined the relationship between a ruler and his capital. This was not a villa with gardens, it was a landscape engineered for a single man's pleasure, swallowing the heart of Rome and transforming it into a private imperial domain. The scale was incomprehensible to the average Roman. Ancient historians like Suetonius describe a complex that stretched from the Palatine Hill to the Esquiline, a sprawling estate of pavilions, groves, and pastures in the very center of the world's most powerful city. At the core of this domain was an artificial lake, a colossal body of water where the Colosseum stands today. Imagine the sheer audacity required to dig a vast, shimmering lake where there had once been densely packed city blocks. This wasn't a decorative pond, it was more like an inland sea, surrounded by landscapes designed to mimic the countryside, complete with vineyards, pastures, and herds of tame animals. The message was unmistakable. The emperor could command not just people, but nature itself. He could erase the urban fabric and replace it with a rural idyll for his sole enjoyment. The surrounding parkland was a curated wilderness, stocked with every conceivable type of game for imperial hunts, yet this rustic illusion was framed by unparalleled luxury. The main palace building itself was famed for its revolutionary octagonal dining room, with a ceiling that rotated like the heavens, scattering flowers and perfumes upon the guests below. The walls were sheathed in gold and mother of pearl, and precious stones were embedded in the vaulted ceilings. Here, the garden was not a retreat from the house. The entire world outside the palace walls was the garden, a stage set for the emperor's amusement. The domus aurea represented the ultimate perversion of the Roman garden ideal. The traditional hortus was about integrating useful and beautiful elements for the benefit of the household. Nero's creation was pure, unadulterated spectacle, a display of consumption on a scale that dwarfed any concept of utility. His artificial lake and sprawling vineyards in the city center were a direct insult to the Roman virtues of frugality and public service. While ordinary citizens struggled to find housing after the fire, the emperor used public land for his private hunting grounds. While the city's economy relied on imported grain, he used precious space for decorative vineyards. This was gardening as an act of supreme power, a way of demonstrating that the rules which applied to everyone else did not apply to him. The poet Martial captured the public sense of awe and resentment when he wrote that in the Domus Aurea, Rome itself was transformed into a single house, and all other houses became mere annexes to the emperor's villa. It was a shocking, brazen display that equated personal pleasure with the power of the state. Nero's project, however, was an extreme, not an anomaly. Other emperors expressed their power through gardens in different, though equally telling, ways. Augustus, the first emperor, cultivated a more modest public image, but his creation of temple precincts like the portico of Apollo on the Palatine Hill seamlessly blended sacred architecture with lush plantings, framing his rule as a new golden age of peace and cultural refinement. In contrast, Emperor Hadrian, a century later, chose to build his masterpiece not in Rome, but at Tivoli. His villa was a microcosm of the entire empire, a vast collection of gardens and architectural recreations of the places he had visited and conquered. There was a canopus evoking the Egyptian canal and a lyceum representing the Athenian school of Aristotle. Hadrian's garden was not just a display of wealth, but a display of intellectual and territorial mastery. It showed that the emperor's mind could contain the entire known world, and his garden could physically replicate it. This was a more sophisticated, but no less powerful, statement than Nero's brute force appropriation of land. It demonstrated that imperial gardens were always deeply political, whether they screamed their dominance like the Domus Aurea or whispered it through allusions to global empire like Hadrian's villa. They were the ultimate expression of a single individual's ability to reshape the world according to his own personal vision, making the landscape itself a monument to his reign. But how do we know so much about these lost landscapes? How can we be so confident describing the scent of roses or the texture of a boxwood hedge in a garden that turned to dust centuries ago? A remarkable part of the answer lies not in the soil, but on the walls and floors of the Romans' own homes, when they couldn't have a real garden, or when they wanted to extend the feeling of one beyond its physical limits. They turned their interiors into permanent springs through the magical realism of fresco and mosaic. This was more than mere decoration. It was a form of wish fulfillment painted directly onto the plaster, an enduring testament to how deeply the ideal of the garden was rooted in the Roman soul. Perhaps the most breathtaking example of this artifice survives at the villa of Livia at Prima Porta, the country home of Emperor Augustus's wife. Here, archaeologists uncovered a room completely underground, a sunken triclinium or dining room that would have been dark and windowless. Yet the Romans refused to let reality dictate their experience. They commissioned artists to transform all four walls into a single continuous garden vista, a panoramic masterpiece that made the very room itself vanish, replaced by the illusion of a lush, verdant paradise. Stepping into that room today or standing before the reconstructed panels in a museum is an almost disorienting experience. You are not looking at a painting of a garden on a wall. You are suddenly in a garden, surrounded on all sides by a delicate fence that seems to separate you from an impossibly fertile landscape. The artist employed a sophisticated understanding of depth and light to create this illusion. In the foreground, a delicate wicker fence is rendered in such fine detail you can almost feel its texture. Just beyond it, the world erupts in a symphony of green. Every plant is depicted with meticulous, almost scientific accuracy. You can identify irises, poppies, roses, chamomile, and quince, all blooming simultaneously in an eternal, perfect spring. The trees are heavy with fruit, from pomegranates bursting open to reveal their ruby seeds to stately date palms swaying gently. The colors are soft yet vibrant, with a masterful use of light and shadow that makes the foliage appear to rustle in a gentle, unseen breeze. There are no people in this garden, no gods or heroes. The focus is entirely on the natural world, but a world perfected, a nature that is forever fruitful, forever in bloom, and forever peaceful. This was not just a clever trick to brighten a windowless room, it was a profound psychological and cultural statement. In this subterranean chamber, Livia and her guests could dine in climate-controlled comfort, completely insulated from the summer heat or winter chill, while enjoying the serene, curated view of an ideal garden that never wilted, never required watering, and was never invaded by insects. It was the ultimate control over nature, a garden that required no labor and defied all seasons, but the symbolism likely ran even deeper. The specific plants chosen for this fresco weren't random. Many of them, like the pomegranate and the date palm, were associated with fertility, abundance, and sacred themes. For Livia, who was central to the Julio-Claudian dynasty and the propaganda of a new golden age under Augustus, this perpetual garden could have been a powerful visual metaphor for the peace, prosperity, and fertile future she and her husband promised the Roman world. It was a political message written in flora, declaring that under their rule, it was always springtime for Rome. The technique used to create this immersive experience is known as the sacro-idyllic style. It blends the sacred with the rustic, creating a vision of an idealized, peaceful countryside that is both spiritual and serene. While the villa of Livia's garden room is the most famous, this desire to bring the garden indoors was a common theme in Roman wall painting, particularly in the towns preserved by Mount Vesuvius. In Pompeii and Herculaneum, you find less overwhelming but equally evocative garden frescoes. A popular motif was the representation of a simple, fenced garden, often viewed as if through a window, painted on the walls of a real peristyle garden. This created a fascinating double layer of reality, where the actual plants and the painted ones played off each other, making the real space feel larger and more enchanted. These painted gardens often included birds, doves, magpies, and sparrows perched on the faux fences or fluttering among the painted branches, their presence adding a layer of lively movement and sound to the silent, static image. Sometimes small, delicate fountains or theatrical masks would be included in the composition, reinforcing the garden's role as a place of leisure, performance, and refreshing coolness. This artistic obsession extended from the walls to the very floors people walked on. While statues populated the three-dimensional garden, mosaics brought its essence underfoot in the most durable form of art the Romans perfected. In wealthier homes, it was not uncommon to find mosaic floors in garden-facing rooms that continued the natural theme. A beautiful example might be a mosaic of a shallow basket, a canistrum, overflowing with freshly picked fruit, figs, grapes, and pears, so realistic they seem to roll right off the floor. Another might depict a careful still life of a water jug and a bird, as if a visitor had just paused for a drink in the garden and left their belongings for a moment. These floor mosaics were not just decorative, they were a continuation of the garden's bounty into the heart of the home, a permanent harvest that could never spoil. They reminded those who walked over them that abundance and the refined enjoyment of nature were the foundations of their civilized life. Together, the immersive frescoes and the intricate mosaics formed a complete aesthetic environment. They ensured that even when indoors, a Roman was never truly separated from the ideal of the garden. It was an art form born from a deep longing, a way to capture the fleeting beauty of a rose in full bloom and make it last for eternity, turning the walls of a home into a permanent passport to paradise. All of these descriptions from poets, the vibrant frescoes, and the intricate mosaics give us a powerful vision, but they are, in the end, artistic interpretations. To truly walk through a Roman garden, we need to step beyond the text and the painting and into the soil itself. We need to turn to the silent, astonishing evidence preserved in the ground, and for that, our journey takes us to one of the most famous and tragic archaeological sites in the world, the cities buried by Mount Vesuvius. When the volcano erupted in 79 AD, it did not merely destroy the towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum, it froze them in time, creating a perfect, if horrifying, snapshot of Roman life. The same layers of hot ash and pumice that suffocated the inhabitants also sealed and preserved the most ephemeral elements of their world, including their gardens, offering us a unique opportunity to see past the art and into the living reality. The key to this botanical time capsule lies in a phenomenon that is as simple as it is profound. When the volcanic ash and debris settled over these cities, it buried everything, including the gardens. The plants themselves, the roses, the boxwoods, the fruit trees, quickly decayed, leaving behind empty voids in the compacted ash. But these weren't just random holes. They were perfect, inverted molds of the root systems that had once been there. For centuries, these cavities remained hidden until archaeologists developed a brilliant technique. They began to inject these empty spaces with a liquid plaster, much like a dentist filling a tooth. Once the plaster set and the surrounding volcanic material was carefully brushed away, what remained was a solid, ghostly cast of the plant's root ball. Suddenly, the invisible became visible. Instead of guessing, we could now hold in our hands the precise shape and size of a 2,000-year-old rosemary bush or a laurel tree. This method, known as root cavity casting, transformed our understanding, allowing us to move from imagining a generic garden to mapping a specific one, plant by plant. At the house of the Vettii in Pompeii, a residence owned by two wealthy freedmen, this technique revealed a peristyle garden of stunning elegance and clear intent. The plaster cast showed a formal, symmetrical layout with a series of small geometric planting beds arranged around a central fountain. The root cavities indicated the presence of carefully trimmed boxwood hedges, defining the borders of each bed, just as the ancient writers had described. Larger cavities showed where taller, shade-giving trees like lemon and cherry had once stood, while smaller, denser clusters of cavities revealed the locations of flowering plants and fragrant herbs. This wasn't an artist's impression, it was the garden's skeletal structure, its underlying blueprint rendered in white plaster. By analyzing the soil chemistry and the types of pollen found preserved in the ash, scientists could go even further, identifying specific species. They found evidence of roses and violets for scent and decoration, alongside poppies and rue for medicine and cooking. The Vettii garden was a perfect physical manifestation of the integrated hortus, where beauty and utility grew side by side, exactly as the text suggested. Another extraordinary example comes from the Villa Pompeii at Oplontis, a sprawling seaside luxury estate believed to have belonged to Emperor Nero's wife. Here the scale was immense. The root cavity cast revealed not just a simple courtyard garden, but a vast park-like landscape. Archaeologists uncovered the ghostly traces of long avenues of plane trees, their massive root systems indicating a shaded promenade fit for an empress. They found evidence of a large, decorative pool surrounded by oleander bushes, their vibrant pink flowers once reflected in the water. The arrangement was grand and theatrical, designed to be viewed from the villa's many porticos and to impress every visitor with its scale and sophistication. The evidence from Oplontis confirms what Pliny the Younger described in his letters, that for the super-rich, the garden was an entire environment, a curated nature that was as much a part of the architecture as the walls and the columns. The plaster root casts gave us the hard data to prove that these literary accounts were not mere boasts, but accurate descriptions of a breathtaking reality. Moving beyond the root systems, the volcanic preservation also captured the garden's infrastructure in incredible detail. In Herculaneum, which was submerged by a much hotter, denser pyroclastic flow, even wooden elements were carbonized and preserved. Archaeologists have found the remains of wooden trellises, their charred lattices still standing where they once supported climbing vines of ivy or grape. They've uncovered the imprints of wooden garden benches and the carbonized remains of fruit baskets left in a hurry. This level of preservation allows us to reconstruct not just what grew in the garden, but how it was used and experienced. We can see the simple terracotta pots, the oli perforetti, which were specially made with holes in their sides for starting cuttings and transplanting seedlings. We can even find the lead pipes and the bronze stopcocks that fed water to the fountains, the very plumbing that brought the garden's soundtrack to life. This combination of root casts, carbonized wood, and intact hardware provides a complete, multifaceted picture, moving our understanding from the theoretical to the tangible. The story of these gardens doesn't end with their excavation. It continues in modern laboratories. Today, archaeologists employ a suite of advanced scientific techniques to extract even more information from the soil of these ancient spaces. Palynology, the study of pollen grains, allows scientists to identify the specific types of flowers that bloom there, even if their roots left no distinct cavity. Analysis of soil chemistry can reveal traces of fertilizers and composts, telling us how the Romans nourished their plants to achieve such lushness. The study of phytoliths, microscopic silica structures found in plants, can tell us what types of grasses were used for lawns or what cereals were grown in a kitchen garden. This scientific detective work is like assembling a massive, complex jigsaw puzzle where every tiny piece of evidence, a plaster cast, a grain of pollen, a trace of mineral in the soil, helps to complete the picture. It verifies the plant lists found in Roman gardening manuals, confirms the scenes depicted in the frescoes, and adds a layer of scientific certainty to our historical recreations. Thanks to the tragedy of Vesuvius and the ingenuity of modern archaeology, the Roman garden is no longer a ghost. It is a living, breathing field of study, allowing us to reach across 2 millennia and, quite literally, touch the roots of a lost world. Walking through the excavated doorway into the peristyle of the House of the Veii is perhaps the closest we will ever come to time travel, stepping directly into the daily life of a prosperous Roman family before Vesuvius fell silent. This was the home of Aulus Vettius Restitutus and Aulus Vettius Conviva, 2 brothers who were freedmen, former slaves who had amassed a fortune, likely in the wine trade. Their garden was not just a pleasant retreat, it was a bold and unmissable declaration of their hard-won status, a vibrant, living resume crafted in greenery, bronze, and marble for every guest to see. The space is a classic peristyle, a rectangular courtyard surrounded on all 4 sides by a colonnade of red columns, but every inch of it speaks of careful, intentional design aimed at delighting the senses and impressing visitors. The moment you step into the colonnade, your eyes are drawn to the heart of the garden, where a charming bronze fountain still stands today, just as it did 2,000 years ago. This isn't a grand imperial jet of water, but something more intimate and playful. The fountain takes the form of a small, pudgy cupid, holding a goose and wrestling with it as water spouts comically from the bird's beak into a shallow marble basin below. The choice of a cupid, a symbol of love and pleasure, set the tone for the entire space. This was a place for enjoyment, for conviviality, for the good life they had earned. The gentle splashing sound of that fountain would have been the constant soundtrack of the garden, masking the distant city noise and creating that cool, refreshing atmosphere the Romans so cherished. It was the auditory soul of this outdoor room, a reminder that even in the heart of a bustling commercial town, one could create a private paradise, and everywhere you looked, that paradise was populated by a whimsical cast of bronze and marble characters. Dotting the garden and mounted on small, decorative columns were numerous statues of cherubs and satyrs, frozen in various playful acts. Some cherubs are depicted pressing grapes, a direct and proud nod to the source of the Veii brothers' wealth. Others are shown riding dolphins, evoking themes of sea travel and commerce. The satyrs, with their pointed ears and mischievous grins, bring a touch of wild, untamed nature and Bacchic revelry into the ordered space. This wasn't a solemn collection of philosopher busts, as you might find in a more austere senator's villa. This was a garden designed for pleasure and celebration. Each statue was strategically placed so that as you walk the shaded portico, your journey will be punctuated by these delightful encounters, each one a small scene from a larger story about prosperity, joy, and a touch of mythic magic. Beneath this sculptural narrative lay the garden's living tapestry. Thanks to the revolutionary archaeological technique of root cavity casting, we know the exact layout of the original planting beds. The garden was divided into a series of geometric plots, arranged in a symmetrical and orderly fashion, bordered by low, carefully clipped boxwood hedges. These were not the wild, romantic flower beds of a later era, but structured displays of color and fragrance, a living mosaic on the forest floor. Modern archaeologists, using the evidence from the plaster cast and soil analysis, have meticulously replanted these beds with the very species that grew here: vibrant roses used for garlands and perfume, blooming violets whose sweet scent would have filled the air, and the brilliant red of poppies, valued for their seeds and medicinal properties. The lush green of the boxwood provided a perfect backdrop, making the colors of the flowers pop against the dark earth and the painted garden walls behind them. The walls. The Vetii garden is a masterpiece of layered illusion. The actual physical garden is framed by the colonnade, but the Romans weren't satisfied with just that. The walls of the portico itself are adorned with stunning frescoes that depict an even more expansive and magical garden scene. Painted in the sacro-idyllic style, these murals show a delicate golden fence separating the real world from a fantastical landscape beyond. On these painted walls, birds perch on the faux fence, peacocks strut, and delicate trees sway in an eternal breeze. This clever artistic device created a breathtaking sense of depth, making the relatively small peristyle feel like a gateway to an endless, idyllic countryside. It blurred the line between the cultivated nature within the courtyard and the idealized nature of art, suggesting that the Vetii brothers' domain of beauty and abundance extended far beyond its physical boundaries. This entire ensemble, the splashing Cupid, the playful statues, the fragrant, ordered flower beds, and the expansive painted vistas, worked in perfect harmony to create a multi-sensory experience. A guest invited for dinner would recline in the triclinium, their view perfectly framed by the doorway to look out upon this curated spectacle. They would feel the cool breeze, hear the water, smell the roses and violets, and take in a scene that spoke of wealth, sophisticated taste, and a mastery over both art and nature. For the Vetii brothers, this garden was the ultimate proof of their success. It was their personal theater, a stage where they could present themselves not as former slaves, but as refined Roman gentlemen, full participants in the culture of odium and the good life. It stands today not as a ruin, but as a vibrant, breathing letter from the past, a complete and eloquent statement about what a garden meant to the Romans who planted it. The magic of these gardens didn't happen by chance. It was the result of immense skill, daily labor, and a sophisticated toolkit wielded by the Roman gardener, the horticultus. While wealthy owners like the Vetii brothers enjoyed the finished spectacle, it was the horticultus and his team of slaves or hired workers who possessed the deep, hands-on knowledge that turned soil and seed into paradise. Their work was a year-round cycle of meticulous care, relying on a collection of tools that, in their basic forms, would look very familiar to any gardener today. The fundamental implement was the pala, a sturdy wooden shovel, often tipped with an iron blade for cutting through tough soil and for digging the planting pits for new trees and shrubs. Alongside it was the racelis, a rake with iron or wooden teeth, used for breaking up clods of earth, leveling soil in the planting beds, and clearing away leaves and debris to keep the garden looking immaculate. And never far from the gardener's belt was his falx, a versatile pruning knife with a curved blade, essential for everything from harvesting herbs and flowers to carefully trimming wayward branches and performing the delicate work of grafting. But the true expertise of the horticultus went far beyond simply owning these basic tools. It lay in the advanced horticultural techniques they mastered. The Romans weren't just planting seeds, they were actively shaping and improving plant life itself. One of their most crucial skills was propagation, particularly taking cuttings. They understood that a branch from a prized fig or a particularly fragrant rose could be encouraged to form its own roots. Detailed instructions in agricultural manuals like those by Cato the Elder explain how to select a healthy shoot, trim it properly, and plant it in a specially prepared bed of loose, sandy soil, often in a terracotta pot called an alla perforata, a pot riddled with holes that provided perfect drainage and aeration for the developing root system. This allowed them to reliably clone their most valued plants, ensuring that a favorite variety could be spread throughout the garden or shared with neighbors, preserving and multiplying genetic lines with impressive success. Even more sophisticated was their widespread use of grafting. This was the secret behind many of the botanical marvels in a wealthy Roman's garden. If a landowner acquired a single sapling of a rare sweet cherry from the Black Sea region, the horticultus knew how to make it the mother of an entire orchard. Using his sharp falx, he would carefully take a bud or a small scion from that precious cherry tree and skillfully attach it to the established rootstock of a hardy, common local cherry. The two pieces would be bound with linen and sealed with clay to prevent disease, and if all went well, they would grow together as one. This technique allowed the Romans to experiment constantly, creating trees that bore multiple types of fruit, improving the flavor and size of native species, and rapidly acclimatizing exotic imports by giving them the robust roots of a local plant. It was a form of practical botany that blurred the line between gardening and genetic engineering. Beneath the surface of all this lush growth was another critical area of Roman expertise: soil management. They knew that fertile, vibrant earth was the non-negotiable foundation of any successful garden. While they didn't understand soil chemistry in a modern sense, they were brilliant empiricists. They carefully observed which plants thrived in sandy soil versus heavy clay, and they actively worked to improve their land. Their primary method was systematic manuring. The writings of Columbia, another major agricultural author, are filled with detailed advice on the best types of manure to use, ranking pigeon dung as the most potent, followed by goat, sheep, and cattle manure. They understood the value of compost, creating rich humus by piling up kitchen scraps, fallen leaves, and other organic waste to decompose. This wasn't just about adding nutrients, it was about creating a healthy, living soil structure, what they called terra pasta, that retained moisture but also drained well, providing the perfect environment for their plants' roots to thrive. Of course, even in this carefully managed Eden, pests were a constant battle. Insects, birds, and rodents saw the garden as their own personal banquet, and the Roman horticulanists had to be a creative defender. Their pest control methods were a fascinating mix of the practical, the superstitious, and the surprisingly effective, all relying on natural repellents. To protect precious seedlings from birds, they would hang shining bits of metal or polished pottery shards that would clatter and flash in the sun, scaring the birds away. To deter destructive insects like caterpillars, they didn't have chemical sprays, but they did have a deep knowledge of botanical properties. They would create concoctions to sprinkle on plants, such as a bitter tea made from wormwood, or a mixture of ash and water, which acted as a natural deterrent. They even used stronger smells, like burning the gum of the giant fennel plant, to fumigate gardens and drive pests out. Perhaps one of their most ingenious methods involved encouraging natural predators. They knew that toads and certain species of beetles were voracious consumers of slugs and other harmful insects, so they would actively create habitats for these helpful creatures, understanding the basic principles of a balanced ecosystem long before the term was ever coined. This daily hands-on work, the feel of the wooden shovel handle, the precise cut of the pruning knife, the careful mixing of manure into the soil, was the hidden reality behind the beautiful frescoes and poetic descriptions. The splendor of the Roman garden was, in the end, a testament to the skill and relentless effort of the gardener, whose knowledge of the land made the dream of paradise a tangible, blooming reality. While the master of the house enjoyed the serene beauty of his peristyle and the prestige of his exotic fruit trees, the true architect of this daily miracle was the horticulanist, the head gardener who possessed a profound, practical knowledge of the living world. This figure was far more than a simple laborer. He was a specialist, a manager, and a master of his craft, whose expertise directly reflected on his owner's status. In the hierarchical world of ancient Rome, the horticulanist could be a highly valued slave, a trusted freedman who had earned his position, or even a hired professional, but his role was always one of immense responsibility. He was the unseen hand that guided every process, the one who understood the secret language of plants, soil, and water, translating his master's grand vision into a living, breathing reality through a combination of inherited wisdom, sharp observation, and skillful execution. This gardener's day began at dawn and was governed by the relentless rhythm of the seasons and the specific, demanding needs of his domain. His duties were vast and varied, encompassing the entirety of the garden's life cycle. In early spring, he was a propagator, carefully selecting the best shoots from prized plants to take cuttings, which he would nurture in specially designed terracotta pots with perfect drainage. He was a master of grafting, skillfully using his curved pruning knife to bind a delicate scion from a rare peach tree onto the hardy rootstock of a common plum, creating a new hybrid that would bear superior fruit. Throughout the growing season, he was a constant pruner and shaper, not just keeping things tidy but artistically directing growth, training vines to climb trellises in elegant patterns, and with his shears sculpting boxwood into the crisp geometric shapes and playful topiary figures that were the hallmark of a sophisticated Roman garden. His eye was trained to spot the first signs of trouble: a discolored leaf, a pest infestation, a patch of dry soil, and his knowledge provided the remedy. Perhaps his most critical daily responsibility was his command over water, the very lifeblood of the garden. While the aqueducts brought the water to the property, it was the horticulture who managed its final, intricate distribution. He would carefully control the flow from the main lead pipes into the smaller channels that fed the fountains and irrigation runs. He knew precisely how long to let water flow into each planting bed, understanding that the roses needed more than the lavender, and that the new seedlings required a gentler touch than the established trees. He would personally check and maintain the bronze stopcocks and clear the narrow channels of any debris to ensure an unimpeded flow, because a single day's failure could mean withered plants and a furious master. This control over such a precious resource placed him in a position of great trust. A negligent gardener could waste a fortune in water, while a skilled one could make even a modest plot flourish as if it were fed by a perpetual spring. But his expertise wasn't just technical, it was deeply botanical and even medical. The horticulture was the walking encyclopedia of the estate when it came to plants. He knew which herbs like rue or tansy could be planted as a natural repellent for insects, and which companion plants like beans sown near cucumbers would help each other thrive. He maintained the kitchen garden with an eye for both the culinary and the curative, ensuring a steady supply of cabbages and leeks for the pot, but also of sage for sore throats and poppies for pain relief. He understood soil not as mere dirt, but as a living substance that needed to be fed and balanced. He would direct the systematic collection of manure, with pigeon droppings being the most prized for their potency, and the creation of rich compost from kitchen waste, turning it all back into the earth to maintain what the Romans called terra pasta, a fertile, crumbly, and perfectly balanced soil. Ultimately, the horticulture was judged on one thing above all else: his ability to meet the exacting aesthetic standards of his master. A Roman garden was a stage for social display, and any imperfection was a blot on the owner's reputation. The horticulturist, therefore, had to be an artist as much as a farmer. He ensured the flower beds were a vibrant mosaic of color, with blooms dead-headed to encourage more flowers. He kept the gravel paths raked and pristine, the marble statues clean, and the lawn areas where they existed neatly trimmed. When the master was expecting important guests, the gardener's role became a performance in itself, a final flurry of activity to make every leaf glisten and every blossom appear at its peak. A truly exceptional horticulturist, one who could coax a rare eastern flower to bloom or maintain a fantastical topiary scene, was a prized asset, a living treasure who could significantly enhance his owner's social standing. In the quiet daily dialogue between the gardener and his garden, the grand Roman ideals of beauty, order, and control over nature were made manifest, one carefully tended plant at a time. For the Roman elite, a garden was more than just a collection of beautiful plants and statues. It was a physical manifestation of a profound philosophical stance, a carefully constructed environment for the cultivation of the mind. This intellectual dimension finds its most articulate voice in the writings of Marcus Tullius Cicero. For Cicero, his beloved country villas at Tusculum and Arpinum were not mere retreats from the political chaos of the late Republic, but essential workshops for the spirit. He famously expressed that his garden and his library were all he truly needed, a sentiment that captures the very essence of the Roman ideal of odium. This was no simple idleness or lazy vacation. It was a state of purposeful, cultivated leisure dedicated to philosophical inquiry, literary creation, and meaningful conversation with friends. Within the quiet, shaded colonnades of his garden, far from the noisy forum, Cicero could engage with the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, write his philosophical treatises on duty and the nature of the gods, and refine the rhetorical skills that made him Rome's greatest orator. The garden provided the serene backdrop against which the tumult of public life, the negodium, could be processed, understood, and transcended. It was a sanctuary where the soul could find equilibrium, and where the intellectual and moral virtues so prized by Roman culture could be nurtured and strengthened. This philosophical role elevated the garden from a place of mere pleasure to a sacred space for the pursuit of wisdom and a good life. This intellectual current flowed powerfully through Roman literature, where the garden and the cultivated landscape became central symbols of peace, order, and national identity. No poet captured this spirit more beautifully than Virgil, whose Georgics stands as a majestic poem dedicated not to epic heroes, but to the dignity of agricultural labor. On the surface, the Georgics is a practical guide to farming, covering everything from tending vines and raising cattle to keeping bees, but Virgil elevates these instructions into a profound philosophical and patriotic manifesto. He presents the farmer's life as the true bedrock of Roman strength and morality, a life of honest toil in harmony with the rhythms of the earth, the carefully tended field, the productive orchard, the orderly rows of the vineyard. These were, for Virgil, the ultimate symbols of a civilized and virtuous society. He saw in the farmer's struggle to impose order on the wildness of nature a parallel to Rome's own civilizing mission in the world. The garden and the farm were not escapes from reality, but the very source of its meaning, providing a moral compass that stood in stark contrast to the corruption and strife of urban politics. Through Virgil's verse, the simple act of pruning a vine or grafting a fruit tree is transformed into a sacred, almost heroic, act that sustains the republic itself. This literary tradition extended beyond grand national epics to more personal, lyrical reflections on the garden's role in a life well lived. The poet Horace, in his Sabine Farm, became the most famous advocate for the aurea mediocritas, the golden mean. His poetry is filled with grateful praise for the modest self-sufficiency his small piece of land provided, a life contentedly removed from the frantic race for wealth and power in Rome. He paints vivid pictures of sitting under the shade of his own trees, enjoying a simple meal of olives, chicory, and mallow from his garden, and engaging in quiet conversation with a friend. For Horace, the garden was the physical guarantee of his philosophical independence. It was the proof that one could live a life of virtue and happiness without the burdens of excessive ambition. This celebration of rustic simplicity created a powerful and enduring cultural archetype, one that influenced countless generations after him. The Roman gentleman's dream of retiring to his country estate to write poetry and tend his roses finds its most charming and relatable expression in the works of Horace, who showed that true peace was not to be found in the Senate house, but in the quiet corners of a private garden. Even in the more urban and sometimes cynical world of Roman elegy, the garden retained its symbolic power, though often with a more personal and sometimes subversive twist. The poet Ovid, before his exile, wrote playful verses that treated gardens as the perfect settings for amorous intrigue and sophisticated flirtation. In his works, the secluded paths and leafy groves of a garden become stages for romantic encounters, a world away from the prying eyes of husbands and social conventions. Here, the garden symbolizes not philosophical retreat, but a different kind of freedom, the freedom for personal pleasure and sophisticated urban leisure. However, after Emperor Augustus banished him to the remote shores of the Black Sea, Ovid's relationship with the natural world turned to one of bitter longing. In his exile poetry, he desperately misses the cultivated, orderly gardens of Rome, contrasting them with the harsher, untamed wilderness that surrounds him. For the exiled poet, the well-tended garden back home becomes the ultimate symbol of everything he has lost: civilization, culture, beauty, and his very identity. His lamentations highlight just how deeply the concept of the garden was woven into the Roman sense of self. To be deprived of it was to be cast out of the human world into a form of living death. Ultimately, whether as a setting for Ciceronian philosophy, Virgilian patriotism, Horatian contentment, or Ovidian desire and loss, the garden in the Roman mind was a versatile and powerful symbol of the ideal. It represented the perfect balance between humanity and nature, between exertion and rest, between public duty and private reflection. It was a space where the highest values of Roman culture, order, productivity, beauty, and intellectual and spiritual refinement could be physically enacted and enjoyed. The literary and philosophical reflections on these spaces ensured that their significance extended far beyond their walls, shaping the Roman imagination and leaving a legacy that would inspire the humanist scholars of the Renaissance and garden lovers for centuries to come. The Roman garden was, in the most profound sense, a landscape of the mind, a place where one could cultivate not just plants but a way of being. But to truly understand the power these spaces held, we must close our eyes for a moment to the marble and the mosaics and instead immerse ourselves in the full multi-sensory experience they were designed to provide. A Roman garden was not a silent painting to be admired from a distance. It was a living, breathing environment that engaged every one of the senses in a deliberate symphony of pleasure. Imagine yourself reclining on a cushioned bench in the shade of a peristyle colonnade. Before you even register the vibrant colors, you are enveloped by a wave of fragrance so potent and complex, it feels almost like a physical presence. This was not the faint, occasional scent of a single flower bed. It was a constant, carefully orchestrated perfume. The undisputed queen of this aromatic realm was the rose, cultivated in such abundance that their heavy, sweet, and slightly spicy perfume would have been the dominant note, a scent so prized that wealthy hosts would float rose petals in their fountains and even saturate their awnings with rosewater so that a gentle, scented mist would cool their guests. Interwoven with this floral grandeur were the sharp, cleansing notes of rosemary and the earthy, calming aroma of lavender, planted in dense hedges along the pathways, releasing their fragrance with every brush of a passing tunic. Beneath it all lay a grounding bass note from the warm, peppery scent of thyme crushed underfoot, and the cool, fresh smell of mint flourishing in the damp soil near a fountain. This intricate bouquet was the garden's invisible architecture, a fragrant atmosphere designed to soothe nerves, delight the spirit, and announce a world of cultivated luxury from the moment one stepped inside. As this cloud of perfume settles around you, your ears would begin to tune into the garden's soundscape, a crucial element engineered for tranquility. In a world without the constant hum of machinery, the Romans were acutely sensitive to sound, and they understood its power to shape mood. The most important sound, the one they worked hardest to create, was the gentle, continuous music of moving water. The soft, rhythmic splash of a fountain was the garden's heartbeat. It might be the cheerful gurgle of a bronze cupid spouting water from a goose's beak into a marble basin, or the more dignified, steady trickle of a slender jet falling into a broad, reflective pool. In larger gardens, a network of small channels or europae would carry water in a quiet, murmuring flow, its sound varying as you moved closer or farther away. This aquatic soundtrack served a brilliant dual purpose. On a practical level, it provided a refreshing, cooling background noise, but psychologically, it was a masterful tool for masking the intrusive clamor of the world beyond the walls. The distant rumble of cartwheels on stone streets, the shouts of merchants, the general din of a crowded city. This manufactured sonic bubble created a perceived oasis of calm, making the garden feel like a separate, insulated realm where the only things that mattered were beauty and peaceful conversation. The rustle of leaves in the breeze from a tall poplar or plane tree and the soft chirping of birds attracted to the fruit and berries provided a natural counterpoint to the water's melody, completing an auditory environment meticulously crafted for relaxation and intellectual focus. After the distant senses of smell and hearing were captivated, the more intimate senses of touch and taste were invited to participate. The Roman pursuit of voluptas or pleasure was profoundly physical. Throughout the garden, vine-covered pergolas created canopies of dappled shade, their leaves filtering the harsh Mediterranean sun into a soft, cool light. To walk from the sun-baked courtyard into one of these shaded walkways was to feel an immediate and grateful drop in temperature, a tangible refreshment that was as much a part of the garden's luxury as any statue. The very act of strolling invited tactile engagement, the crunch of white gravel under your sandals, the smooth, cool surface of a marble bench as you sat down to rest, the soft brush of a lavender spike against your hand. And then came the taste. This was not a garden where you were discouraged from touching the plants. It was one that encouraged you to taste its bounty. A guest would be invited to pluck a sun-warmed fig, its skin splitting with sugary ripeness, directly from a tree trained against a warm wall. They could reach up and pick a cluster of fat, purple grapes from a pergola overhead, tasting the very essence of the estate's success. A servant might bring a silver bowl of chilled cherries, another exotic luxury, or a plate of fresh almonds. The garden offered a direct, unmediated connection between the cultivated earth and the palate, a constant reminder of the fertility and abundance that the careful hand of the gardener could produce. This integration of taste transformed the space from a mere visual spectacle into a fully participatory feast. This multi-sensory design was not an accident. It was the culmination of the Roman philosophical and aesthetic principles we discussed earlier. The garden was the ultimate expression of odium, but it was an odium that engaged the whole person, not just the mind. The perfumed air catered to the spirit, the soothing water sounds calmed the nerves, the tactile coolness refreshed the body, and the fresh fruits delighted the palate. Every element worked in concert to create a state of holistic well-being. It was a practical application of Epicurean ideals which sought a life free from pain and anxiety, filled with simple, refined pleasures. The gentle stimulation of all five senses prevented any single one from becoming overwhelmed, fostering a balanced and serene state of mind perfect for the philosophical discussions and literary recitals that often took place there. The garden was, therefore, a kind of therapeutic landscape, an ancient antecedent to modern sensory gardens. It was a meticulously controlled environment where every sight, sound, smell, taste, and texture was curated to produce a specific result, a harmonious human being, temporarily removed from the stresses of negotium or public business and restored to a state of peace and intellectual readiness. To experience a Roman garden in its full context is to understand that its beauty was not just something to be seen, but something to be breathed, heard, felt, and savored, a complete and immersive refuge for the soul. This Roman ideal of the garden as a controlled architectural paradise didn't vanish with the empire's decline. It merely went dormant, buried under layers of history, waiting for the right cultural moment to burst forth once more. That moment arrived with the Renaissance, a period of explosive rediscovery when Europe turned its gaze back to the classical world, unearthing not just statues and ruins, but also the very text that had guided Roman garden design. The recovery of manuscripts by writers like Pliny the Younger and the architectural treatise by Vitruvius was nothing short of revolutionary. For the first time in a millennium, European scholars and artists could read detailed, first-hand accounts of what a Roman villa and its gardens should be. Pliny's letters, with their evocative descriptions of shaded walkways, splashing fountains, and panoramic views, provided a blueprint for a way of life that Renaissance humanists found intoxicating. They weren't just reading about gardening, they were absorbing a philosophy of odium, of cultivated leisure in a harmonious landscape, and they were determined to resurrect it. The initial rebirth happened fittingly in Italy itself. Wealthy patrons and powerful cardinals, inspired by these classical models, began to build country villas outside Florence and Rome that were direct homages to the Roman villa urbana. But these weren't mere copies, they were reinterpretations filtered through a new, confident humanist lens. The key innovation was perspective. Renaissance designers used the precise mathematical principles of linear perspective, another rediscovered classical concept, to organize the garden. They saw the landscape as an extension of the villa's architecture, creating a seamless flow from the built environment to the cultivated nature outside. The result was the Italian Renaissance garden, a masterpiece of axial symmetry and geometric order. Think of the Villa d'Este at Tivoli, with its breathtaking sequence of terraces carved into the hillside, connected by grand staircases and monumental fountains. Every path leads the eye on a deliberate journey. Every hedge and bosco of trees is placed to frame a vista or create a surprise. The water, so vital to the Romans, was here engineered into a theatrical spectacle. Water organs, roaring cascades, and hundreds of fountains that celebrated the patron's control over this most precious element, just as a Roman senator would have done. This Italian ideal didn't remain confined to the peninsula for long. In the 17th century, it traveled north to France, where it was transformed on an even grander, more political scale under the Sun King, Louis XIV. At the Palace of Versailles, the gardener André Lenatter took the principles of the Italian Renaissance garden and amplified them into a stunning expression of absolute power. The scale became truly imperial. Where an Italian garden might have a central axis, Versailles has a dominant central axis that stretches to the horizon, symbolizing the king's limitless reach. The intricate parterres near the palace, embroidered with low boxwood and colored gravel, were like enormous tapestries viewed from the palace windows, a direct evolution of the Roman Xystus, but on a civic scale. The vast canals were the Europus of the Romans magnified 1,000-fold, reflecting the sky and demonstrating a dominion over water and land that would have made any Roman emperor nod in approval. The garden at Versailles was not a private retreat for philosophical contemplation. It was a stage for the entire French court, a powerful tool of statecraft that used classical design principles to communicate one simple, overwhelming message: that the king was the ultimate source of order and control in the world. Meanwhile, in England, a more complex and eventually rebellious relationship with the Roman legacy developed. The English aristocracy, first enamored with the formal style, created their own versions of Versailles on a smaller scale, with geometrically arranged gardens, long avenues, and carefully clipped hedges. Yet a characteristically English resistance to such rigid order began to simmer. The 18th century saw the birth of the landscape movement, a philosophical and aesthetic revolution that seemingly rejected the formal Roman and Renaissance template. Designers like Lancelot Capability Brown famously swept away the parterres and straight lines, creating rolling lawns, serpentine lakes, and carefully placed clumps of trees that appeared entirely natural. It might seem like a complete break from Rome, but the connection was merely submerged, not severed. The inspiration for these natural landscapes came from the idealized pastoral scenes described in the poetry of Virgil and Horace, the same Roman writers who had celebrated the rustic countryside. The goal was the same Roman odium, a peaceful retreat from the world, but now expressed through an aesthetic of idealized wilderness rather than geometric order. Even in this apparent rebellion, the Roman ideal of the villa as a self-sufficient, beautiful refuge for the cultivated mind remained the underlying inspiration. This dynamic interplay between formal order and romantic naturalism, both rooted in classical ideals, continues to shape our gardens to this day. The legacy of the Roman garden is not a single style, but a set of enduring principles. The concept of the garden as an outdoor room, so perfectly realized in the Roman peristyle, is a cornerstone of modern landscape design. The use of water as a decorative and cooling element, the strategic placement of sculpture, and the idea of the garden as a place for both social gathering and private reflection are all direct inheritances from ancient Rome. When you see a public park with a shaded promenade, a civic plaza with a central fountain, or a private backyard with a terrace for dining, you are witnessing the unbroken, though often invisible, lineage of the Roman hortus. It is a testament to the profound and sophisticated vision the Romans developed, a vision of harmony between humanity and nature that proved so powerful it could be buried for 1,000 years, only to be rediscovered and continue to inspire our pursuit of creating a corner of paradise on earth. But within this mosaic of vibrant flowers, shaded walkways, and bubbling fountains, there is one element of the modern garden you would have searched for in vain: the expansive emerald green lawn. For all their horticultural sophistication, the Romans had no concept of the closely shorn, uniform carpet of grass that we consider essential today. This isn't to say they didn't have grass, they absolutely did, but their relationship with it was entirely different, rooted in practicality, ecology, and a completely different aesthetic ideal. You might come across a grassy area in a large park or a country villa, but it wouldn't be a manicured lawn. Instead, it would be what they called a pratum, a meadow. This was a functional and beautiful space, a tapestry of mixed native grasses and a riot of wildflowers like poppies, clover, and chamomile. These meadows were often left to grow quite long, and they were valued for their natural, pastoral beauty and for the practical purpose of providing hay to feed livestock or to stuff mattresses and cushions. They were a celebration of a productive, almost poetic wildness, not a symbol of human control over every single blade of grass. The technology required for the modern lawn simply didn't exist. The Romans had scythes for harvesting hay in meadows, but the idea of a dedicated, pushed mower was over a millennium and a half away. They could not have achieved the perfectly level, putting green surface we know today, even if they had wanted to. More importantly, the sheer volume of water required to maintain a large, thirsty monoculture of grass in the Mediterranean climate would have been seen as a spectacularly wasteful use of a precious, engineered resource. Water was for drinking, for bathing, for supplying magnificent fountains that demonstrated power and provided cooling sound, and for irrigating valuable crops and ornamental flowers. Using it to sustain a purely decorative expanse of grass would have been, in the Roman mind, an irrational and almost immoral misallocation. Their entire approach to water was one of disciplined, purposeful distribution, not profligate sprinkling. So what did they use for the open, usable surfaces in their more formal gardens, especially in the smaller urban peristyles? The answer is wonderfully pragmatic and low maintenance, packed earth, gravel, and stone. In many townhouse courtyards, the central area wasn't a planted bed at all, but a floor of well-tamped reddish-brown earth known as terra battuta. This surface was durable, drained well after rain, and could be swept clean with ease. It provided a neutral, warm-tone stage for the decorative elements of the garden: the fountain, the statues, the surrounding flower beds. Even more common was the use of gravel or glaria. A path of crisp white gravel crunching under your sandals was a quintessential sound and sensation of the Roman garden. This material was inexpensive, readily available, and excellent for drainage, and it created a bright, clean visual contrast with the dark green of the boxwood hedges and the vibrant colors of the flowers. For the wealthiest homeowners, these surfaces might be elevated to true artistry with intricate stone pavements, using colorful marble chips to create simple geometric patterns, or even elaborate mosaic scenes underfoot. This choice reveals a fundamental difference in how the Romans viewed the ground plane of their gardens. For us, a lawn is a living green carpet. For the Romans, the open ground was a functional surface, a platform for human activity, and a frame for the living plants. It was the negative space that made the positive elements, the roses, the statues, the fountains, stand out in greater relief. Their gardens were composed of distinct elements carefully arranged within this frame: the ordered geometry of the planted beds, the vertical accents of trees and sculptures, and the central focus of the water feature. A uniform green lawn would have visually blurred these carefully orchestrated components, creating a monotonous sea that worked against their desire for structured, architectural composition. Their aesthetic was one of clear definition and contrast, not seamless, homogeneous blending. This absence of the lawn underscores a broader philosophical point about the Roman relationship with the land. Their gardens were intensely curated and managed, but they did not seek to erase nature's own variety. The meadow, with its mix of grasses and flowers, was an accepted and valued part of the landscape precisely because it was useful and naturally beautiful. The Roman garden was a dialogue between the wild and the tame, between the productive and the decorative. The meadow represented a controlled concession to the wild, while the formal xystus with its clipped hedges represented absolute human mastery. The modern lawn falls somewhere in an unsatisfying middle. It is an attempt to tame nature into a single, perfect species, which requires constant, relentless intervention to maintain an illusion of simplicity. The Romans, ever practical, saw no virtue in that particular struggle. They preferred either the honest utility of a meadow, the crisp functionality of a gravel path, or the overt artistry of a mosaic floor, each serving its purpose within their harmonious, multifaceted, and brilliantly sensible paradise. Recreating the serene elegance of a Roman garden might seem like a task for archaeologists with unlimited budgets, but the truth is, you can capture its spirit in your own backyard with a few thoughtful choices. Across the globe, historians and horticulturalists have been doing exactly this, piecing together these ancient oases to better understand the Roman world. One of the most stunning and accessible examples is the garden at the Getty Villa in Malibu, California. This museum, itself a meticulous recreation of a Roman country house, is surrounded by gardens that are living laboratories of history. Walking through them, you are surrounded by the same aromatic herbs, shaded by the same types of trees, and soothed by the same gentle sounds of water that would have been familiar to a Roman family 2,000 years ago. The team at the Getty didn't just guess at the plant list. They pored over ancient texts like Pliny's letters, studied the root cavities from Pompeii, and analyzed frescoes to create an authentic botanical palette. They planted sturdy boxwood hedges to form geometric patterns, trained ivy to climb the columns of the peristyle, and filled the air with the scents of rosemary, lavender, and myrtle. Seeing these gardens in full bloom is the closest you can get to a functional time machine, a powerful demonstration that the Roman ideal of a harmonious, multi-sensory retreat is not lost to history, but can be a vibrant, living reality. You don't need a museum's resources or a sprawling estate to bring a touch of this classical tranquility home. The most impactful place to start is with the soul of the Roman garden, a water feature. The Romans believed that the sound and sight of moving water were non-negotiable for creating a refreshing, peaceful atmosphere. You can embrace this principle without installing a monumental marble fountain. A simple self-contained ceramic or stone fountain that recirculates water can provide that essential, gentle soundtrack. The goal isn't a roaring cascade, but a soft trickle or a steady drip into a basin, a sound that masks neighborhood noise and creates a cooling microclimate. Place it as a focal point, perhaps at the center of a small patio or at the end of a garden path, where it can draw the eye and soothe the ear. This single element does more than any other to transform a modern yard into a Roman-inspired sanctuary, establishing an immediate sense of calm and reflective leisure the moment you step outside. Next, think about structure and greenery. The Romans loved formal architectural lines in their planting schemes, and you can achieve this look with two key elements, evergreens and terracotta. A pair of potted laurel trees, trimmed into clean lollipop shapes, can flank a doorway or a garden bench, providing that classic vertical accent the Romans used so effectively with their cypress and bay trees. Laurel is not only historically accurate but also wonderfully resilient, thriving in containers and lending an air of timeless elegance. For your flower beds, define the space with low, clipped boxwood hedges. These create the crisp, geometric parterres that were the hallmark of the formal Zeistes garden. Inside these green borders, you can plant a tapestry of color and fragrance. Prioritize plants that do double duty, just as the Romans did. Rosemary and lavender are perfect choices, offering beautiful foliage, delightful flowers that attract bees, and leaves you can harvest for the kitchen. Interplant them with old-fashioned fragrant flowers like roses, irises, or violets. This combination of structured evergreens and productive fragrant plants captures the very essence of the Roman hortus, where beauty and utility grew side by side. Finally, cultivate your own version of the Roman hortus salubarius, the health-giving garden. Dedicate a sunny corner or a series of raised beds to a culinary and medicinal herb garden. Arrange the beds in a simple geometric pattern, perhaps a square divided into 4 triangles by 2 gravel paths, to echo the Roman love for order. Plant the staples of the Roman kitchen and apothecary, sprawling sage for its soft gray-green leaves and healing properties, pungent thyme to creep between stepping stones, bright green chives for their mild onion flavor, and various mints for teas and sauces. Add a bay laurel tree in a central pot if you have the space, so you can pluck a leaf to flavor a stew. To complete the Roman ambience, incorporate a few comfortable places to sit and enjoy your creation. A simple stone or wooden bench placed in a shaded spot, perhaps overlooking your water feature, invites you to practice that cherished Roman ideal of odium. Add a statue or a reproduction of a Roman artifact, a bust of a philosopher, a small mosaic, or a graceful figure of a goddess, to provide a focal point for contemplation. The goal isn't to slavishly replicate an archaeological site, but to weave together these core principles: the sound of water, the structure of evergreens, the fragrance of herbs, and a comfortable seat from which to enjoy it all. In doing so, you create more than just a garden. You create a personal retreat, a small corner of your world dedicated to peace, beauty, and the timeless pleasure of cultivating your own paradise. When we picture a Roman garden, our minds often leap to those perfectly ordered peristyles with their geometric flower beds and gleaming marble statues, a vision of total human control over nature. But this is only one side of the story. The Roman love for order existed in a dynamic and sometimes surprising tension with an appreciation for the wild and the rustic. On a sprawling country estate, right alongside the meticulously clipped boxwood of the Zeistes, you would often find a nemesis, a deliberately naturalistic grove or meadow. This wasn't a sign of neglect, it was a carefully curated wilderness. These areas were designed to evoke the feeling of the sacred groves of old, with winding, informal paths that offered a different kind of pleasure than the straight colonnaded walkways. Here the planting was looser, a mix of native trees and flowering shrubs that attracted birds and bees, creating a pastoral scene that celebrated the simple, honest beauty of the countryside. This intentional blend of the formal and the natural reveals a much more nuanced Roman aesthetic, one that valued the philosophical ideal of the cultivated landscape, but also harbored a deep-seated nostalgia for the untamed Italian countryside of their ancestors. Another common assumption is that without modern chemicals, Roman gardeners were helpless against the onslaught of insects and other pests. The truth is, they were remarkably savvy and resourceful eco-warriors, employing a sophisticated array of natural pest control methods. They understood the concept of companion planting long before it had a name. For instance, they knew that strong-smelling herbs could confuse or repel destructive insects. They would plant rosemary and rue near their precious cabbages to deter the white cabbage butterfly, and they used bitter sprays made from wormwood to protect other vulnerable seedlings. Their most ingenious tactics, however, involved biological warfare. They actively encouraged natural predators to take up residence in the garden. A toad living near the lettuce patch was considered a valuable ally, as it would consume countless slugs and insects overnight. They even cultivated certain species of predatory beetles for the same purpose, and to protect their fruit from birds, they didn't need nets, they used flash and sound. They would hang shimmering strips of polished metal or broken pottery in their fruit trees. As these twisted in the wind, they would catch the sunlight and create a disorienting clatter, scaring away birds without harming them. This deep, observant understanding of the garden's ecosystem allowed them to manage pests effectively, working with nature rather than trying to dominate it with brute force. Perhaps one of the most enduring Roman innovations, one that feels strikingly modern in any gardener's toolkit today, is the technique of espalier. While we often think of them building with stone and brick, they were also masters at training living plants to become part of the architecture itself. The Romans didn't have the wide, open spaces we might associate with orchards in the city. They had sun-drenched walls. Recognizing that a south-facing wall absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly at night, they developed a brilliant solution for growing tender fruits in a compact space. They would plant a fruit tree like a fig, apple, or pear close to the wall, and then over years, carefully prune and tie its branches to grow flat against the surface in a symmetrical, two-dimensional pattern. This practice, which we now call espalier, allowed the tree to benefit from the radiant heat, protecting it from frost and helping the fruit to ripen more fully. But it wasn't just practical, it was also beautiful. An espalier tree transformed a blank wall into a living tapestry of greenery, flowers, and fruit, a perfect marriage of horticultural skill and aesthetic design that maximized both production and beauty in even the smallest of urban courtyards. These surprising truths challenge the marble and formality stereotype and show us a culture that was both incredibly sophisticated and deeply practical. They reveled in geometric order, but they also cherished the romantic ideal of the rustic meadow. They lacked our technology, but their clever, sustainable pest control methods are principles that organic gardeners are rediscovering today. And their development of espalier is a testament to a creative ingenuity that continues to influence how we grow food in small spaces. The Roman garden was not a single monolithic idea, but a vibrant, adaptable space where human artistry and the resilient power of nature were in constant, productive conversation. So from the humble, life-sustaining hortus to the breathtakingly ambitious imperial parks, we've journeyed through a world where soil, water, and leaf were woven into the very fabric of Roman civilization. These gardens were far more than just beautiful escapes. They were a profound and continuous statement about who the Romans were. In every clipped boxwood hedge, we see their love for order and geometry. In every splashing fountain, we witness their engineering genius and their desire to command the elements. In the statues of philosophers placed among the roses, we find their yearning for intellectual and spiritual nourishment. And in the seamless integration of vegetables, herbs, and flowers, we uncover a holistic world view that saw no contradiction between the useful and the beautiful, between feeding the body and refreshing the spirit. The Roman garden was the ultimate expression of a culture that sought to build a perfected, human-made paradise, a corner of the world where nature was not rejected, but invited, refined, and harmonized with human ambition. This incredible legacy did not vanish with the last Roman emperor. As we saw, the seeds of these ideas lay dormant, only to be rediscovered and reimagined centuries later, shaping the grand gardens of the Renaissance, the sweeping landscapes of France, and even our modern love for outdoor living rooms and serene retreats. The next time you relax in a courtyard, listen to the gentle trickle of a water feature, or simply enjoy the fragrance of an herb garden, you are, in a small way, partaking in a tradition that was perfected 2,000 years ago. The Roman vision of the garden as a sanctuary for the soul, a stage for society, and a testament to our ability to shape our environment remains as vital and inspiring today as it was then. I want to thank you deeply for joining me on this exploration of these lost landscapes. Now, I'm incredibly curious to hear from you. After this journey, which single element of a Roman garden would you most want to bring into your own life? Would it be the tranquil sound of a marble fountain, the structured elegance of a topiary, or the simple, satisfying abundance of a kitchen herb garden? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.